Hi everyone. Today we're going to change speed a little bit and we're going to begin learning about reproduction in plants, which is still, I guess, tied to life in space. We're going to make a little bit of a pivot here today. If you need to get a hold of me, hopefully by now you know the best way to do that is by email. You can see my email address there on the screen. If you haven't already, take a moment, pause the video, gather up your materials. You'll need your pencil, your science notebook, and some color pencils. Let's move ahead and go ahead and start with our bell ringer. So question number one, here's our review question. Question number one, what layer in Earth's atmosphere protects living things from ultraviolet radiation? Without this layer, ultraviolet radiation would destroy the cells and living things, so it would be difficult for life here on Earth to exist. Did you remember that's the ozone layer? So the ozone layer protects living things. That's part of our atmosphere. Here's our second review question. What is the name for the type of gases in Earth's atmosphere that helps warm Earth by temporarily trapping heat from the sun? So we talked about without these gases, this type of gas, CO2 being one of them, that Earth would be too cold and Earth would freeze and would not allow liquid water to be there. So did you remember those are called greenhouse gases? Greenhouse gases. They trap energy from the sun temporarily. And here's our final review question today. Earth is just the right distance from the sun in the blank zone, which allows liquid water to exist. So when we looked at life in space, hopefully you remember that there was a diagram where we had one planet that was very close, one planet that was very far, and one planet that was just the right distance from the sun. And the name of the zone that it was in was, of course, the habitable zone. I did also share with you, and some of you may have thought of this answer, the Goldilocks zone. So that would also be a correct answer. Let's take a look at some lesson objectives for today. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to explain to me what a life process is. This is something that all fifth graders in North Carolina studied. Explain what reproduction and offspring are. Next, you might need to be able to list the three basic parts of a seed and their function. If you were here with me, we've already done that. Compare asexual reproduction to sexual reproduction by listing the key characteristics of each. So we're going to be able to compare the two basic types of reproduction. I need you to be able to explain what fertilization is as it relates to reproduction. Explain what a plant embryo is and where it can be found. And finally, describe the type of reproduction that plants use, that plants predominantly use. Let's keep moving. All right, so let's get our brains up and working. And I'm going to want you to pause the video here in just a moment, but I want you to see if you can remember the 7 life processes. And you may have learned 6, you may have learned 9, but there's 7 things, seven things that all living things do. There's several activities that they all carry out. See if you can remember what some of those 7 life processes are. If you'll just write your answers in the margin of your notebook, go ahead and pause your video. So for me, I like to remember things with sort of memory tricks. And so this is once again a list that can be hard to remember. And so I like to use Mrs. Green to help me remember. So I like to put this little old lady's face in my mind, and I like to use her name to remember the first letter of each of those life processes. Okay, so Mrs. Green. And we can see that Mrs. Green gives us the first letter of movement, respiration, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion, and nutrition. So those are 7 life processes. Of course, we're going to be looking specifically here at reproduction. So a life process is really just any essential life activity. If you are alive, you have to do all of these things. You couldn't do just 5 of them or even 6 of them. You would have to be considered to be alive by scientists, you would have to make sure you carry out all of these. So for example, one of the things that's in the news a lot right now is viruses. There are several things on this list that viruses do not do. As a result, scientists say viruses are not alive. They turn out to be really good at reproduction, but some of these other life processes, they're not cells, and so they don't do these. So viruses are not alive. So you have to carry out all of these, not just one or two or five. So when we look at reproduction specifically, reproduction is just the process that an organism uses to make offspring, to produce its offspring. So we can see in our picture here, we have Mama Duck, and these are her offspring. And by offspring, we mean her babies, we mean her children, um, the next generation. And organisms have a variety of ways that they reproduce, how they make, the next generation. And we're going to be taking a look at some of those. It is important to remember, though, without reproduction, species will become extinct. So if we have a particular species of plant or animal, a particular type of animal or plant that is not able to reproduce, then there's no next generation, and eventually that species would face extinction. When we look at plants, there's about 300,000 different types of plants on Earth, and of those, about 260,000 end up using seeds for reproduction. So it's very clear that most plants use seeds for reproduction. Looks like about 87%. It's a very specific number. And so you may say, why so many? If there's a lot of different ways that reproduction can be done, then why do plants so often use seeds? Well, let me tell you why. Well, it's really because it works. Seeds turn out to be quite an evolutionary adaptation for plants that have made them very successful. Almost any ecosystem or environment that you go to on Earth, you will find plants there. So when we look at a seed, remember we studied three basic parts. We looked at something called the seed coat, which is this dark outer ring. We looked at this inner large part here, which we call the cotyledon, and then we looked at the baby plant itself, and the baby plant we of course called an embryo. So when we look at seeds, we look at those basic parts. Every one of those parts helps the embryo inside the seed, the living thing, the next generation, the offspring. It helps it to survive. So seeds have really allowed plants to colonize almost all land on Earth. So remember we said embryo is our baby plant, which is here. We have our cotyledon. Our cotyledon is really a store of food for when this baby plant finds the right conditions to begin growing, when it's warm enough, there's enough water. That's food. It's a little sack of food, if you will, that the embryo keeps with it. It makes plants very, very successful. We also have like this outer tough covering, and if you've ever played around with beans or soaked beans, you'll have seen that seed coat before. So remember, seeds, big adaptation for plants. Those seeds will lie dormant, just waiting for the right conditions to begin their growth. But most plants use these. So let's take a look at our two types of reproduction. We have sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Let's take a look first at asexual reproduction. So when we talk about asexual reproduction, A means not, by the way. Asexual reproduction means that only one parent is required. So we have one parent that's producing the next generation or producing the offspring. With asexual reproduction, there is no male or female at all. And I use the word reproductive cells, and you'll understand why later on. But male and female is a completely foreign idea when we study asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, the offspring turn out to be exact copies of the parent, i.e., really clones. So that would be, you can imagine that in the way that some of you already view reproduction, your ideas, where, essentially one of your parents would be able to produce you, and you would be exactly like them in every way. You would be an identical, I guess, almost like a twin to them. So asexual reproduction, this is often common for single-celled organisms. This is not very common with larger organisms. Single-celled organisms use this, and this is where a single parent cell divides into what we call two identical daughter cells that would be relatively half the size. So literally, as you can see there, the cell, the nuclei inside of the cell, which has its DNA, it splits apart, and then the cell pinches itself in two, and as a result, we have a new organism. So this is reproduction. This is sort of that next generation. Some of these single-celled organisms that use this, things like bacteria, can reproduce incredibly fast. They can go from hundreds to millions in just a few hours. So this is an incredibly fast type of reproduction if you're a single-celled organism. Let's go ahead and compare that to sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction, of course, requires two parents, not just one parent. We have both male and female. The idea of male and female comes from sexual reproduction. So we have male and female reproductive cells, and by that we mean, of course, the sperm and the egg. The sexual reproduction produces unique offspring. And so unique offspring, meaning that they have a mixture of traits, they get some of their traits from each parent. Some of you have probably had people tell you before, oh, you have your dad's eyes, or you have your mom's nose, or you might have noticed that you share a hair color with someone else in your family. That's a result of this sort of a unique offspring that has a mixture. You get some traits from each parent. When we talk about sexual reproduction, there's some specific things that we need to take a look at. One of them is fertilization. And so fertilization is just going to be when the male and female reproductive cells are joined together. That moment they unite, we would say that constitutes or that represents fertilization. And another vocabulary word we need is one that we've seen before when we studied seeds, but an embryo is an unborn offspring in early growth stages. So these are two words that we'll need. So asexual versus sexual reproduction. Remember, one requires one parent and produces an exact copy, while the other, we have two parents and we get a mixture of traits, some from each parent. And so, interestingly enough, plants, though we would not think of it, I think most of you wouldn't, plants actually use sexual reproduction. Plants actually have this idea of male and female. As a matter of fact, most plants have separate male and female parts, often on the same plants. Now, some of you right now are probably rightly going, wow, I've looked at a lot of plants, but I've never seen male and female parts. Well, that's just because when you see them, you don't actually know what the function or the purpose of some of the plant parts are. Now, it is rare, but it does happen. I can think of one in particular, ginkgo trees, where you might have an entire plant that is completely male, while another plant of the same species might be completely female. This is pretty rare. Most often you get male and female parts on the same plant, but there are plants that use where the entire plant itself would be either male or female. Some plants can fertilize themselves. This is called self-pollination, but that's pretty rare. Most plants have to be fertilized. Remember, fertilized is that union of the male and female reproductive cells. Most plants have to be fertilized by another plant. If so, to create seeds or the next generation, their offspring, most plants have to be fertilized by another plant. Now, of course, if you're a plant, this presents some pretty difficult problems to solve. You can't move around your environment to mate with another plant. So, plants have got some strategies, some adaptations that they rely on that allows them to produce the next generation. But the most important thing here to remember is plants actually have male and female parts, and they use sexual reproduction. All right, so some notes that you're going to need to copy into your notebook. Please copy these exactly. This will be very helpful on you for your weekly quizzes that you'll see with me. If it's underlined, please underline it, and please copy it exactly. The reason I ask you to copy it exactly is because these are very much like the words that I'm going to use on your eventual quiz. So if you will, please pause the video, copy these down. When you're finished, go ahead and restart. All right, so welcome back. I do want to go ahead and talk to you about this week's quiz. So last week we studied some solar system, planets. We looked at space rocks, the types of space rocks. And so that's what our quiz will be on this week. I want you to use the resources. You can use the notes you put in your notebook. You can use my videos. Feel free to use your resources. And I want you to take this quiz as many times as you would like. This quiz will be posted on Quizzes. It's going to be posted there, I believe, at 8 a.m. On April 28th. So you can use the Quizzes link and the game code that you'll find directly in my daily Google Classroom post. Now, let's suppose that you're watching me on a USB drive. So if you're on a USB drive, you're going to need to go back to that drive, open the science folder, double click on the document that is labeled quiz, And then I want you to write your answers on notebook paper like I asked you to do last week. Once again, you can use your notes, you can use the videos. I've also put some notes directly on the USB for you to look at if you should need them. When you finish though, make sure you write your name on your paper, and you need to ask an adult to take a picture of your quiz answer sheet. I only need from you the notebook paper or the answers, and you can either text that to this number, area code 828-506-3221, or I think better yet, you can take a picture and email it, whichever is most convenient for the adult that's helping you. All right, let's get to a just for fun lab today. So we've been looking at seeds, and I think this would be a good time to hopefully get you outside. Hopefully it's not raining. Go outside, and I want you to go on a seed walk. As you walk around outside, take your notebook. I want you to look at the plants that you see around you, and I want you to spot as many types of seeds as you can. Um, I think it would be great if you would gather a small sample of the different types of seeds you find. You can, if you take your phone with you, if you have a phone, you can take some pictures. But gather a small sample of the different seeds, and you can just put them in the fold of your notebook. And let's see how many different types you can find. So you might want to look on trees. You're going to want to look on herbaceous plants like green plants that are just coming up. Look on grasses. So just really take a look around, see how many different seeds you can find. Uh, you know, I'd love for you to make some notes in your science notebook if you can complete this lab. Sketches work great. So take a walk around, look for some seeds, and for now, I guess that will do it. I'll see you next time. Stay curious.